The phone's shrill ring pierced the quiet of our Sunday afternoon, shattering my peaceful reverie. I glanced at James, my husband of 30 years, who raised an eyebrow over his newspaper. With a sigh, I heaved myself off the couch, my 7-month pregnant belly making the simple act a chore. "Hello?" I answered, expecting my sister Laura's cheerful voice. Instead, I heard my younger brother Edward's excited chatter. "Helena, you won't believe it, I'm getting married." I blinked, momentarily stunned. Married? Edward, that's wonderful. But isn't this a bit sudden? I didn't even know you were dating anyone seriously. "Oh, come on, sis. Don't be such a wet blanket. Rebecca's amazing. You'll love her when you meet her." I frowned, a nagging worry settling in my chest. "When exactly are you planning this wedding?" "Next month." Edward's enthusiasm was palpable through the phone. "We don't want to wait. When you know, right?" I caught James's concerned look from across the room. "Edward, sweetie, I'm due in 2 months. I'm not sure I can—" "Please, Helena." Edward's voice softened. "It would mean the world to me if you were there. You're my big sister. I need you." My resolve crumbled at his plea. "All right, I'll be there, but promise me you'll be careful, okay?" After hanging up, I turned to James, who was already shaking his head. "You're not seriously considering traveling in your condition, are you?" I sank back onto the couch, my mind whirling. "I have to, James. Something doesn't feel right about this. Edward's always been impulsive, but this is extreme even for him." James set aside his paper and took my hand. "I understand your concern, but think about the baby. It's not safe for you to travel so close to your due date." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his concern. "I know the risks, but I can't shake this feeling. Edward needs me. I'll be careful, I promise." 2 weeks later, I found myself stepping off a plane in my hometown, my back aching and my feet swollen. I hadn't told Edward I was coming. I wanted to surprise him and maybe get a chance to assess the situation without the influence of his new fiancée. As I waddled through the airport, I spotted a familiar face. "Laura!" I called out, waving to my sister. Laura rushed over, her face a mix of joy and concern. "Helena, what on earth are you doing here? You shouldn't be traveling." I hugged her as best I could around my belly. "I had to come. Have you met this Rebecca?" Laura's expression darkened. "Once, she seemed nice enough, but there's something off about her, Helena. I can't put my finger on it." My worry deepened. If level-headed Laura had concerns, then my instincts were right. "Where's Edward now?" "At home, I think. Want me to drive you there?" 20 minutes later, we pulled up in front of Edward's modest bungalow. As we approached the front door, I heard raised voices from inside. "You can't invite her, Edward. She'll ruin everything." "She's my sister, Rebecca. Of course she's coming to the wedding." I exchanged a glance with Laura before knocking firmly on the door. The voices inside immediately hushed. Edward opened the door, his face lighting up with surprise and joy. "Helena, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, a petite blonde woman appeared behind him, her eyes narrowing as she took in my pregnant form. "You must be the sister," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Rebecca, Edward's fiancée." As I met her gaze, a chill ran down my spine. In that moment, I knew my journey here wasn't just about attending a wedding. It was about protecting my brother from a storm I could see brewing in Rebecca's eyes. The tension in Edward's living room was palpable as Rebecca's saccharine smile failed to reach her eyes. I forced a polite nod, my protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "Edward, can we talk?" I asked, my gaze never leaving Rebecca's face. "Privately?" My brother's warm hand on my shoulder guided me to the backyard, leaving Rebecca and Laura in an uncomfortable silence. As we stepped onto the patio, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Helena, I'm thrilled you're here, but what's going on?" Edward's brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything okay with the baby?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Edward, I'm worried about you. This wedding, it's all happening so fast. Are you sure about this?" His face clouded. "Not you two. I thought at least you'd be happy for me." "I want to be," I insisted, reaching for his hand. "But I barely know Rebecca, and from what I've seen so far, she seems intense." Edward pulled away, his eyes flashing with hurt. "You've known her for all of 5 minutes, Helena. How can you judge her like that?" "I'm not judging," I said softly. "I'm just asking you to slow down and think this through. Marriage is a big step, and you've only known her for what, a few months?" "When you know, you know." He repeated his earlier words, but this time they lacked conviction. I pressed on, my heart aching for my little brother. What about her family? Have you met them? Do they approve of this whirlwind romance? Edward's hesitation spoke volumes. They're coming around. It's complicated. Complicated how? I probed gently. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Rebecca's parents are very traditional. They weren't thrilled about us living together before marriage. That's part of why we're rushing things. My alarm bells were ringing louder now. Edward, you can't base such an important decision on what her parents think. This is your life, your future. I know that, he snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry, Helena. I know you mean well, but I love Rebecca. She makes me happy. I was about to respond when a movement caught my eye. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window, her face a mask of fury as she watched our intimate conversation. Our eyes met, and I saw something dangerous flash in hers before she disappeared from view. Turning back to Edward, I lowered my voice. Just promise me you'll think about what I've said. Take some time to really get to know Rebecca and her family before you commit to forever. Edward nodded reluctantly. I hear you, sis. I'll think about it. As we made our way back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Rebecca stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, her earlier fake sweetness replaced by barely concealed hostility. What a touching family reunion, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I hope you're not trying to talk Edward out of marrying me, Helena. That would be terribly disappointing. I felt Edward stiffen beside me. Rebecca, it's not like that. Helena's just looking out for me. Of course she is, Rebecca sneered, because clearly I'm not good enough for her precious baby brother. Laura stepped forward, ever the peacemaker. I'm sure that's not what Helena meant at all. Why don't we all sit down and get to know each other better? But Rebecca was on a roll. Oh, I think I know exactly what she meant. You all think you're so much better than me, don't you? Well, let me tell you something. Her tirade was cut short by the sharp ring of my cell phone. I fumbled to answer it, grateful for the interruption. Helena? James's worried voice came through. Is everything okay? I've been trying to reach you for hours. As I reassured my husband, I caught Rebecca's calculating gaze. Something in her eyes made me shiver, a premonition of trouble to come. I knew then that my concerns were just the tip of the iceberg, and that this family drama was far from over. The next morning, I woke to the sound of raised voices drifting through the thin walls of Laura's guest room. My back ached as I struggled to sit up, my pregnant belly making every movement a challenge. I recognized Edward's voice, pleading with someone. Rebecca, please, you're overreacting. Helena's just looking out for me. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it to hear better. Looking out for you? Rebecca's shrill voice cut through the air. Is that what you call it when she's trying to seduce you? My jaw dropped. What on earth was she talking about? That's ridiculous, Edward protested. She's my sister, for God's sake. I saw the way she was touching you yesterday, Rebecca hissed. The way she looked at you. It's sick. I'd heard enough. Throwing open the door. I marched into the living room, my face flushed with anger. How dare you? I shouted, startling both Edward and Rebecca. Rebecca whirled to face me, her eyes blazing. You. I knew you'd be eavesdropping. Trying to come between us again? Edward stepped between us, his hands raised. Please, both of you, calm down. This is all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Rebecca screeched. I understand perfectly. Your sister can't stand the thought of you being happy with someone else. She wants you all to herself. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's disgusting, Rebecca. I'm happily married, and more importantly, Edward is my brother. What's wrong with you? Rebecca lunged forward, her face contorted with rage. What's wrong with me? You're the one who can't keep your hands off your own brother. Before I could react, she shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my arms flailing as I tried to regain my balance. Time seemed to slow as I felt myself falling, my pregnant belly suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Helena! Edward's panicked voice was the last thing I heard before my head struck the corner of the coffee table. Pain exploded behind my eyes as I crumpled to the floor. Through the haze, I heard Edward shouting and Laura's footsteps thundering down the stairs. A warm, sticky sensation spread across my lower body, and a horrifying realization dawned on me. The baby, I gasped, clutching my stomach. Something's wrong with the baby. Laura was at my side in an instant, her face pale with shock. "Edward, call an ambulance. Now." As Edward fumbled for his phone, Rebecca stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't mean to," she stammered. "I didn't think she'd fall." "Get out," Laura snarled, surprising me with her vehemence. "Get out of this house before I call the police myself." Rebecca fled, the door slamming behind her. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the pain that was now radiating through my abdomen. "Helena, stay with me," Laura urged, squeezing my hand. "The ambulance is on its way. Everything's going to be okay." But I knew it wasn't okay. The wetness beneath me was growing, and I could feel my consciousness slipping away. My last thoughts before darkness claimed me were of my unborn child and the family I might never see again. When I came to, the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room greeted me. The steady beep of monitors filled the air, and I felt the pull of an IV in my arm. Panic seized me as I remembered what had happened. "My baby," I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "Where's my baby?" A nurse appeared at my side, her kind face etched with concern. "Mrs. Thompson, you're awake. Try not to move too much. The doctor will be here shortly to explain everything." "Please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "Just tell me if my baby is okay." The nurse hesitated, and in that moment of silence my world shattered. Whatever she was about to say, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The doctor's words echoed in my mind as I stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything. "Mrs. Thompson, your baby is stable, but we're monitoring the situation closely. The fall triggered early labor, and we've managed to stop it for now. However, you'll need to remain here for observation." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a surge of anger. Rebecca had nearly cost me my child. As I lay there, a soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting to see James or Laura. Instead, an older couple I didn't recognize entered the room. The woman's face was pinched with worry, while the man's expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I'm Judy, and this is my husband Patrick. We're Rebecca's parents." My body tensed immediately. "What are you doing here?" Patrick stepped forward, his voice smooth and practiced. "We wanted to express our deepest apologies for our daughter's behavior. What happened was inexcusable." I narrowed my eyes, suspicion creeping in. "Where is Rebecca?" Judy wrung her hands nervously. "She's indisposed at the moment. We're handling this situation on her behalf." "Handling it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Your daughter assaulted me and put my baby at risk. This isn't something you can just handle." Patrick raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We understand your anger, Mrs. Thompson. That's why we're here to discuss a settlement." The word hit me like a slap. "A settlement? You think you can buy your way out of this?" "We're simply trying to make things right," Judy interjected. "We're prepared to cover all your medical expenses and offer additional compensation for your pain and suffering." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people thought they could waltz in here and throw money at the problem their daughter had caused. "I don't want your money," I said firmly. "I want justice. Rebecca needs to face the consequences of her actions." Patrick's demeanor shifted, his eyes hardening. "Mrs. Thompson, be reasonable. A legal battle would be messy and drawn out. It would cause stress for you and your unborn child. Surely, a quick and quiet resolution would be best for everyone?" The implication was clear. They thought they could intimidate me into silence. But they had severely underestimated me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my room right now before I call security." Judy looked panicked, but Patrick remained calm. "Think about our offer, Mrs. Thompson. We'll be in touch." As they left, I pressed the call button for the nurse, my hands shaking with rage. When she arrived, I asked her to contact the hospital's legal department immediately. Hours later, as I finished giving my statement to the police, James burst into the room, his face etched with worry. "Helena? I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right? The baby?" I reached for his hand, drawing strength from his presence. "We're okay, James, but something terrible has happened." As I recounted the events of the past 2 days, including Rebecca's parents' visit, James's expression darkened. "They tried to buy you off? After what their daughter did?" I nodded, feeling exhausted but resolute. "They think I'm some helpless, desperate woman they can bully into submission, but they're wrong." James squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do?" I met his gaze. my decision already made. I want to fight, not just for me but for our baby. Rebecca and her family need to learn they can't treat people this way. Are you sure? James asked gently. It could be a long, difficult process. I'm sure, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I won't let them get away with this. Whatever it takes, we're going to see this through. As James nodded his support, I felt a mix of determination and fear. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face whatever came next. Rebecca and her parents had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. The hospital room felt suffocating as I sat up in bed, surrounded by James, Laura, and my lawyer, Sarah. The constant beeping of monitors served as a grim reminder of how close I'd come to losing my baby. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah began, her voice steady, I've reviewed your case. We have a strong argument for assault and battery against Rebecca. However, her parents' attempt to settle complicates things. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. I don't care about complications. I want justice. Sarah nodded, her expression grave. I understand, but you need to be prepared for a difficult battle. The Millers have resources, and they're not afraid to use them. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Edward poked his head in, his face etched with worry. Helena, Rebecca and her parents are here. They're insisting on speaking with you. My heart raced as I looked at James. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. You don't have to see them if you don't want to. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, I need to face them. Let them in. Rebecca entered first, her earlier fury replaced by a mask of contrition. Judy and Patrick followed, their faces unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable. Helena, Rebecca began, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I stared at her, unmoved by her performance. Sorry doesn't cut it, Rebecca. You could have killed my baby. Patrick stepped forward, his tone businesslike. Mrs. Thompson, we've come with a final offer. Double what we proposed earlier, plus a written apology from Rebecca. All we ask is that you drop any potential charges. I felt a surge of indignation. You think you can just throw money at this problem and make it go away? Judy's facade cracked, revealing a hint of desperation. Please think about your family. A long legal battle will be stressful for everyone, especially in your condition. My condition? I spat, my anger boiling over. The condition your daughter put me in? Rebecca burst into tears, clinging to Edward's arm. Eddie, please tell her I didn't mean it. Tell her we can all move past this. I watched my brother's face, seeing the conflict in his eyes. For a moment, I feared he might side with them. But then Edward gently removed Rebecca's hand from his arm. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but what you did, it's unforgivable. Helena and her baby could have died. Rebecca's tears stopped abruptly, her expression hardening. Fine, if that's how you all want to play this, so be it. But remember, we tried to be reasonable. As they turned to leave, Patrick paused at the door. This is your last chance, Mrs. Thompson. Once we walk out, all offers are off the table. I met his gaze, my resolve stronger than ever. Get out, and don't come back unless it's with your lawyer. The door slammed behind them, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Laura was the first to speak, her voice filled with awe. Helena, that was incredible. But are you sure about this? I nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. I'm sure. They need to learn they can't bully people into submission. James kissed my forehead, his eyes shining with pride. Whatever you decide, we're behind you all the way. Sarah cleared her throat, bringing us back to reality. Mrs. Thompson, if you're certain about pursuing legal action, we need to move quickly. The Millers won't waste time building their defense. As I looked around at my family's supportive faces, I felt a surge of strength. This fight wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it. Rebecca and her parents had underestimated me, thinking I was just a vulnerable, pregnant woman they could intimidate. Little did they know, they had awakened a fierce determination in me. I would see this through, not just for myself, but for my baby and for anyone else who might fall victim to their manipulations in the future. Let's do this, I said to Sarah, my voice unwavering. It's time to show the Millers exactly who they're dealing with. The day of my hospital discharge arrived with a mix of relief and apprehension. As James helped me into the wheelchair, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The halls seemed to stretch endlessly as we made our way to the exit, my hand protectively cradling my still swollen belly. Just as we reached the sliding doors, I heard a commotion behind us. My heart sank as I recognized Rebecca's shrill voice. "Helena, you can't do this to us." I turned to see Rebecca storming towards us, her parents trailing behind with panicked expressions. James stepped protectively in front of my wheelchair, his jaw clenched. "Rebecca, this isn't the time or place," he warned. She ignored him, her eyes wild with desperation. "You're ruining everything. Do you have any idea what you're doing to my family?" I felt a surge of anger, momentarily forgetting my physical discomfort. "What I'm doing to your family?" "You assaulted me, Rebecca. You put my baby at risk." Security guards approached, drawn by the escalating scene. Rebecca's father, Patrick, tried to pull her back, but she shrugged him off. "It was an accident," she screamed. "Why can't you just let it go?" Before I could respond, James stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Let it go? My wife could have lost our child because of you. And now, I think it's time you knew something." He turned to me, his eyes seeking permission. I nodded, knowing what he was about to reveal. "We filed a legal complaint against Rebecca and her parents," James announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Assault, battery, and attempted coercion. Our lawyer is handling everything." The color drained from Rebecca's face. Judy let out a strangled gasp, clinging to Patrick's arm. For a moment, the hospital lobby fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, Edward appeared, pushing through the gathering crowd. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Rebecca whirled to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Eddie, please! You have to stop them! Tell them it was all a misunderstanding!" I watched my brother's face, seeing the conflict in his eyes. This was the moment of truth. Would he stand by his fiancée or choose his family? Edward's gaze moved from Rebecca to me, then back again. I held my breath, silently willing him to make the right choice. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't defend what you did. It's over. The wedding, us, all of it." Rebecca's anguished wail echoed through the lobby. She lunged forward, her hands outstretched as if to grab Edward, but the security guards intercepted her. "You can't do this," she shrieked as they restrained her. "I love you, Eddie. We're meant to be together." As the guards escorted Rebecca and her shell-shocked parents away, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly drained away, leaving me feeling weak and shaky. James knelt beside my wheelchair, concern etched on his face. "Helena, are you all right?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Edward approached us slowly, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have listened to you from the beginning. Can you ever forgive me?" I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "There's nothing to forgive, Edward. You're my brother, and I love you." As we finally made our way out of the hospital, I felt a glimmer of hope. The worst seemed to be behind us, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Rebecca and her parents wouldn't give up so easily. Looking at James and Edward, I steeled myself for whatever might come next. We had weathered this storm together, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them as a family. The days following my hospital discharge blurred together in a haze of legal meetings and family discussions. Edward had moved in with us temporarily, still reeling from his broken engagement. I could see the guilt eating away at him, despite our reassurances. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch trying to find a moment of peace, Edward joined me, his face etched with worry. "Helena," he began hesitantly, "Rebecca's been calling nonstop. She says she has something important to tell me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Edward, you can't seriously be considering—" "I'm not," he interrupted, holding up his hands. "But she sounded different. Desperate. I'm worried she might do something drastic." Before I could respond, James burst through the front door, his face pale. "Helena, Edward, you need to see this." We followed him inside to find Laura staring at the TV, her hand covering her mouth in shock. On the screen, Rebecca stood outside our local courthouse, surrounded by reporters. "I'm here to tell the truth," she announced, her voice trembling. "Edward Thompson and his family have been manipulating and threatening me. They're trying to destroy my life because I wouldn't go along with their sick family dynamics." I felt the blood drain from my face as Rebecca continued her tirade, spinning a web of lies that painted us as the villains in her story. "Oh my God! Edward whispered, sinking onto the couch. What have I done? James muted the TV, his jaw clenched in anger. This is slander. We need to call Sarah right away. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was our lawyer. Mrs. Thompson, I assume you're seeing the news. We need to act fast. Can you come to my office immediately? The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. We met with Sarah, who outlined our options, her voice grave as she explained the potential ramifications of Rebecca's public accusations. This could seriously impact your case, she warned. Not to mention the damage to your reputations. We need to counter this narrative quickly and decisively. As we left Sarah's office, a familiar voice called out, Helena, James. I turned to see Judy and Patrick hurrying towards us, their faces a mix of desperation and shame. Please, Judy begged. You have to help us stop Rebecca. She's out of control. Patrick nodded, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine fear. We never meant for things to go this far. We just wanted to protect our daughter. I felt a surge of anger. Protect her? By letting her assault me and then trying to buy our silence? We know we were wrong, Patrick and Rebecca. She's not well. She needs help, not a public spectacle. As they pleaded their case, I saw Edward's expression change. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. Edward, what are you doing? I asked, a sense of dread building in my stomach. He looked up, his eyes filled with determination. Ending this, once and for all. Before any of us could stop him, he hit send on a tweet that would change everything. I, Edward Thompson, hereby state that all accusations made by Rebecca Miller are false. She assaulted my pregnant sister, endangered my unborn niece-nephew, and is now attempting to manipulate the public. I have evidence to support this, which I will be sharing with the authorities. The silence that followed was deafening. Judy let out a choked sob, while Patrick's face drained of color. Edward, I whispered, do you realize what you've done? He nodded, his expression a mix of relief and resignation. I'm choosing my family, Helena. I'm choosing the truth. As we stood there, the weight of Edward's decision hanging in the air, I realized we had reached a point of no return. The climax of our family drama was unfolding, and there was no telling how it would end. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Rebecca's number flashed on the screen. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for whatever storm was about to break. As I answered Rebecca's call, her hysterical voice filled the air. You've ruined everything. I'm coming for you, Helena. You'll pay for this. The line went dead, leaving us in stunned silence. James immediately called the police, while Edward and I exchanged worried glances. We need to get you somewhere safe, Laura insisted, already gathering our things. But before we could leave, a commotion outside caught our attention. Through the window, we saw Rebecca's car screeching to a halt in front of the house. She stumbled out, her eyes wild and unfocused. Edward, she screamed, how could you betray me like this? We watched in horror as she pulled something from her purse. A glint of metal that made my blood run cold. A gun. James moved to block the door, but Edward pushed past him. I have to face her, he said, his voice trembling but determined. As Edward stepped outside, I felt a surge of protective instinct. Despite James's protests, I followed my brother, my heart pounding. Rebecca, Edward called out, his hands raised. Please, put the gun down. We can talk about this. Rebecca's laugh was hollow, bordering on maniacal. Talk? It's too late for that. You've taken everything from me. I stepped forward, ignoring James's frantic whispers to come back. Rebecca, this isn't the way. Think about what you're doing. Her gaze snapped to me, eyes blazing with hatred. This is all your fault. You turned him against me. Time seemed to slow as Rebecca raised the gun, aiming directly at me. I heard James's shout, saw Edward lunge forward, but all I could focus on was the barrel pointed at my swollen belly. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. I met Rebecca's gaze, my voice steady. Is this really who you want to be, Rebecca? Someone who would harm an innocent child? Something flickered in her eyes, a moment of doubt, of humanity breaking through the madness. Her hand trembled. Suddenly, sirens pierced the air. Rebecca's head whipped around, panic replacing rage. As she turned back, Edward tackled her to the ground. The gun skittered across the pavement as police cars swarmed the scene. In the chaos that followed, I found myself enveloped in James's arms, his tears mingling with mine. Laura rushed to us, her face pale but relieved. As the police led Rebecca away, I caught a glimpse of her face. The mask of anger had crumbled, leaving behind a lost, broken woman. For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity. Judy and Patrick approached us, their faces etched with shame and regret. "We're so sorry," Judy sobbed. "We never imagined it would come to this." I took a deep breath, years of tension and fear finally releasing. It's over now. We all have healing to do. In the weeks that followed, our family began the long process of recovery. Rebecca was charged and entered a psychiatric facility. Edward threw himself into therapy, working through his guilt and heartbreak. As for me, I found strength I never knew I possessed. The ordeal had tested us all, but it had also brought us closer together. James and I welcomed our beautiful daughter Lily into the world, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch with Lily in my arms, Edward joined me. His eyes, once clouded with pain, now held a quiet peace. "Thank you, Helena," he said softly, "for never giving up on me, on us." I smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. That's what family does. We stand by each other, no matter what. As we sat there, watching the sun set on another day, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had weathered the storm, faced our demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Life would never be perfect, but with love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family, we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Our story wasn't just one of revenge or justice. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. As Lily cooed softly in my arms, I knew that the best chapters of our lives were still to come, and this time we'd write them together, as a family, united by the trials we'd overcome and the love that had seen us through.